Hey YouTube, Dawson Rider here, and welcome to my season/series review for Power Rangers Cosmic Fury, aka Dino Fury Season 3. I'm already mixing up the Dino series. And the end of the Power Rangers, Part 3. As of right now, this is meant to be the end of the current continuity, or is it? We'll talk about that at the end. How this review is going to work is I took notes after every episode, so I'm going to go over some of my general thoughts and bullet points I wrote down for each episode, and then do my overall positive and negatives at the end. I'm only going to be scoring the whole season and not each individual episode, because outside of the premiere and the last two episodes, none of them kind of stood out in terms of wanting to score them individually. They all kind of felt like pieces of a whole. But this is going to be a long review. I want to keep it under 30 minutes, so let's go ahead and get started. So, if you see me looking over when I don't have a picture up, it's because of my notes. So, first episode. In general, I think that the series and the first episode had a really nice kind of epic scale and feeling a lot of the time. I mean, we obviously opened up on that scene we got a preview clip for with this big full-scale conflict, which was really cool to see. And I love how they tied Billy into it. You know, there is some very loose connections to Once and Always. This was very much so meant, apparently, not to connect to it too much, but they did just enough that it makes it clear it's after Once and Always. You know, Billy went back to space to handle a few things, and apparently he was surveying the planet with Mick, which is a cool detail that they know each other, and that's how they run into them. I love little details like Ollie geeking out over Billy. You get to see the two Tri-Zero Rangers from the beginning of the series and the end fighting together, which was really cool. You know, the new villains are really interesting in this. I'm probably going to be talking about them several times throughout this, but they're effectively like this corporation that's like a mining corporation that has all these huge resources, and they bring up some interesting things. I think they're actually a really interesting idea for an antagonist on multiple levels. I'll dig into it a little bit more at the end. I want to save it, but I'll say it is interesting the way that they're so unique, but they're also like they also are presented through a comedic lens too, which leads to some mixed stuff. But they're interesting, and basically you find out Zed was freed by them. They spent all their resources to free him, and that's how he got freed. I said the word freed so many times just then. And that was kind of a cool way of explaining it. You know, I honestly assumed that Zed had just got free and then like allocated a bunch of resources based on his reputation, but I guess like that's kind of a neat way to fast-track Zed having so many resources, is having this company put him in charge effectively. Now, admittedly, over the season, it's really interesting talking about the pacing, as things do feel rushed, but also well-paced to a degree in certain aspects, because I don't know how far they got planning, but originally they thought it was going to be 20 episodes. I don't know if they started storyboarding or anything with 20 episodes, or they just mentally thought about it, and then it was down to 10. So there is some pacing times where they just have to be rushed. I feel like that's going to be a common criticism, which is understandable, but it also was kind of, you know, not their choice. I think that you can tell that there was meant to be more room for things to breathe. Like, Ollie's turn felt rather sudden, but they needed to have it happen at the beginning. I mean, it was just as simple as another, like, evil spray or something. I was kind of hoping it was more like a sleeper agent thing, or because of what happened with Zed in the past. I mean, obviously, because of what happened in the past is why they selected him, but I was hoping that something that happened to him in the past would relate to it, like they just snapped their fingers and it happened. But that did feel just a little bit weird in the pacing, but I kind of understood why it had to happen. And the way we get the Zords is, I can't believe I forgot, because that's the way Zayto sacrificed himself, that the Zords from Dino Fury were gone. Or at least for some reason I wasn't sure that all of them were gone, but obviously I knew they were going to need to get new Zords. And the way they do it is on this planet, Zordonia, is I guess tied to the Shogun Zords, which I forgot. Like, I remember that the Shogun Zords were originally like these ancient Zords that were separate from the ninja powers, and then Ninjor kind of was like forced to graft the ninja powers to it so the Rangers could pilot it, which was kind of cool in itself. But these come from a similar place from the Shogun Zords, which is really cool. There's still a lot vague about it. Like, there's a lot of mythology things introduced in here that are kind of vague, but it explains just enough, and kind of a cool way for you to either fill the gaps in your imagination, or possibly something like a comic to fill it in the future. But I think it was a really cool way of tying it to the past and gave the Zords kind of an epic feel. There were the Zord system that came from a similar place as the Shogun Zord. And as expected, based on like my speculation, but also we've seen set photos of Rangers piloting Zords that aren't their color, they just kind of interchange them. Like, sometimes they'll match up with the color, like Amelia mostly pilots Lion, although she pilots Dragon at least once, but they just kind of switch them around. Like, not only can they pilot whatever Zord they want, but they can also remotely control it, and they're partly like self-piloting. So I really like that. I feel like the fandom spent so much time arguing about, like, they have to fit the colors. Like, no, you don't. And I feel like that purposely, or like, I think that represented the way I felt about I like being free of the shackles of Sentai and stuff. I like being free of the shackles of, you don't have to put it in a box, they don't have to correspond with each individual color. And I thought it was a unique way that the Zord system wound up working. Just them piloting these different Zords, and everything about like the new powers and losing their powers and getting new powers felt very MMPR Season 2, 3, Zeo, that whole era, which was very nostalgic, because I actually really liked that. It gave it this big epic continuous feel, and when they're piloting these Zords, it reminded me of the MMPR Rangers getting new Zords. And then also when they got their new powers, I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but it very much gave me the vibes of when like they got the ninja powers or the Zeo powers or even Beetleborg's Metallics, which I just really liked. I liked that they also poked fun at the Q-Ranger mecha, with Ollie immediately calling it a Christmas tree ornament Megazord. And then they go back to Earth, and you get to see a lot of the Dino Fury supporting cast. And this is something I might bring up a couple more times because it's in my notes, I know, a couple times. But they did have quite a bit of the Dino Fury supporting cast appearing and making significant contributions throughout the whole season, which I thought was really great because it made it feel like more than just like, oh, this is the final season, it's only about epic stuff. It's like, no, they still managed to continue some of the smaller elements of Dino Fury. Even with stuff that I didn't necessarily need to see, I appreciate that it was in there. And Tarek was in the season quite a bit, which I appreciated. So speaking of, moving on to episode 2, because that's when Jane and Jay Borg appeared according to my notes, I thought they were used well. There was honestly barely any over-the-top bits. The most over-the-top bit was when Jane wanted to eat Jay Borg's cake she was already smashing her face into. But for the most part, they were like toned down. It almost felt like, hey, this is what we'd want to do if we weren't mandated to do all this over-the-top stuff. And they were like kind of keeping the Rangers up to date via their reports. They had a couple good jokes in there, like I think her joke about the plan to trick them was pretty funny. I thought it was well used. I honestly thought that most of the supporting cast was going to appear in episode 1 and then in the end, just to kind of acknowledge them and bookend it, but they were sprinkled throughout, and I think Jane and Jay Borg were used effectively, and I wasn't unhappy to see them. Some of their over-the-top bits weren't necessarily for me 100% in the original series, but I honestly liked the actors, and I thought they did a good job in the role when it worked. I also liked that they were building off stuff from the end of Dino Fury about, you know, Fern and Izzy going to college together, and it kind of played into, you know, why Fern ended up being with them, a little bit of the conflict of Izzy being overprotective. I thought they did a good job building off of that, and I thought they had really good natural couples chemistry. Like, I like Ollie and Amelia together fine, I'll be honest. I'm not overly invested in any of the shipping, but just in terms of talking about general TV chemistry, you know, I always really liked Calvin and Haley had really good couples chemistry for a series where you can't kiss. And it felt natural, like they actually were a couple. And I feel like Izzy and Fern felt like that. I don't feel that much from Ollie and Amelia, mainly because like they got together at the very end of the series and then now they're separated by the whole series. Anyway, I mean, Billy is obviously very involved, which I really liked, and this is something else I'll probably bring up, but I feel like he could have been used more than he was. I feel like he kind of was in the front end more and then kind of took a back seat, and I was a little bit disappointed he didn't get to play more of a mentor role. He had a couple nice scenes, in particular with Javi, helping him through losing his arm, which was really nice, and I appreciated that in general they made time in the season to have a couple nice moments like that, which I'll get to more in the positives. But I did like Billy's role, I just wish he got a little bit more to do. Also, speaking of, the Javi arm stuff was pretty crazy for PR, and I like that there was a little bit of an arc for him with this. Enough, the next thing I have in my notes is Ollie is more likable as evil. Yes, this is something I'll probably bring up when I do overall wrap-up, but Ollie was one of my lesser favorite things in Dino Fury, only because I hate that character, that skeptical, I don't believe in stuff character, but it's more annoying in Power Rangers where, like, all this stuff he's skeptical about has been proven to exist, so he was very annoying, and I felt like he very often didn't learn his lesson, but the actor did a great job playing evil. He was actually one of the highlights of the season for me. I really liked having him as an antagonist. The way Amelia kind of rolls into the leader role is because at the beginning of the season, obviously Ollie's taken away and Zato is kind of jettisoned off. That's like the first almost mini arc, is finding Zato. And so Amelia kind of just naturally takes charge. And I liked the way that this was done. There was a lot of talk about how and why it would happen. And when they got the powers, there was this like, the grid senses something in you, so that's why you're red, which is kind of what I was expecting. I honestly thought that was going to happen when they got the Zords, because we first saw her piloting red as pink. But that was only because she said, we need this Zord because it's the centerpiece. It wasn't because, like, oh, whatever. I honestly thought that she was going to get into the Zord. She's like, why did it give me red? And that was going to be the hint, like, you're the chosen one. But I like the way it was done, because she just kind of naturally took charge. Like, in the case of someone that didn't expect to have all this responsibility, just kind of naturally was able to slide into that role. So I like that they showed you why she was starting to slide into that role, and it felt pretty natural, so that when the moment happened, it felt right. It didn't feel like just telling us, like, yep, she's the chosen one. I thought it was well done. She didn't have much of an arc outside of that, other than just more in a leadership role, and kind of acknowledging it and being like, Zato, is this okay? But given how little time they had, I thought it was well done, and I personally really liked it. Also, one of my favorite bits that I'm glad they brought up, because I thought this was interesting when they brought Billy in, is, like, technically speaking, Zato and Ion became Rangers before them and are older, and I wish they had kept the bit going throughout the season, but there was a joke about how Ion's like, well, technically, I'm the veteran Ranger, and, like, when Billy was fighting, he says, look at that young man go. That was really funny. I'm glad they acknowledged that. I thought that was rather interesting, because I guess technically speaking, Billy has more time as a Ranger, but they were like the first Rangers on Earth, I think, as far as we know. So that was interesting, and I'm glad they acknowledged it, just in general, but also in a funny way that felt very right for Ion. But we end up getting the powers destroyed by the connection to Dino Henge being destroyed, which was interesting because I thought that was going to be key to why the powers were going to be the same, which I thought they handled that in an interesting way, which I'll get to in a minute. And then I like the way they handled the ship, because that was the cliffhanger of this episode, is like, the base wasn't secretly a ship the whole time. It had the plans for it, but it wasn't secretly a ship the whole time, and they built towards it throughout the season, which I thought was well done. It was still a little convenient that there was like plans for it and enough resources to do it, but in general, I actually thought that was pretty cool, because easily could have been like, oh, it's been a ship the whole time, and I thought that was cool. It gave them a little mini arc for that, the ship. Episode 3, this is when we get the new powers, and I like that they start off, I think one of the first scenes, if not the first one, is like, you're entering the room where there's already a conversation happening where Billy's talking about his history with lost powers and regaining powers, and he's like, and then I was a wolf ninja. I thought that was a great callback. I just loved that little moment. There was lots of little moments like that, throwaway little lines, like semi-quasi deep cuts, you know, stuff that definitely some of the more casual new fans won't get. And I really liked that. They also make note during the broadcast where we check in with Jane and Jayborg and others of telling us that other Rangers are fighting the invasion. Because something that's interesting about the way the season handles it is it's not just like we're trying to stop Zed from conquering or getting resources. It's like Zed's already invaded. Like he's on almost every world. There's Rangers fighting him off everywhere. And we don't always see them, which I'll talk about a little bit more, but I appreciate that they acknowledge that there are other Rangers fighting. At one point, they make it sound like all the Rangers are captured besides them, which I kind of don't buy, but just I like that they acknowledged it. And even though it felt like that was happening in the periphery, it made the conflict feel bigger, which I liked. There was also a smart moment in this episode for Ollie where he pretended to be good to get a message from Mick that was sent to his mom, which he did well. He did that a couple times in the season on both sides playing the role, which is funny because they said, oh, you're a bad actor. Amelia said that to him. I don't know if that's meant to be some sort of nod to like fan criticism of the season's acting, but regardless, it was smart. But also, it's like then he gave up his cover immediately. He's like, ha, then I'll destroy that worm. I'm like, dude, you could have kept your cover and that could have been beneficial for later. I also forgot to mention, because there's so much else going on, which this was kind of in like the spoilers or whatever, but you know, Mick is not only in the season, but the Morphin Masters give him back his red ninja steel powers, which was really cool. I really liked how much Mick was in the season. It was more in the first half, but it was neat to see, mainly because I love Kelson Henderson, and I think he kind of deserves to be in this final season in this role as a Red Ranger, and it gave this really cool feel to everything where, you know, the fandom, and you know, myself included at times, has a tendency to want to box certain things in about like, okay, who's going to pilot what Zord? What's the team lineup look like? Like, who's the sixth Ranger? And I like that this wasn't like fitting into any of those categories. I'm like, well, is Zato, or who's the sixth Ranger? Is it Ion? Is it Zato? Is it Fern? It doesn't matter. Or like you have this weird team mix-up where sometimes you got MMPR Blue, Ninja Steel Red, and Heckle in there. I thought that was cool. Like, it felt free of like these boxes we put things in, and I thought that was neat. And it was just cool to see Mick. Admittedly disappointed they didn't have him cameo as Boom. It would have been so easy, he just takes the wig off, but it was cool to see. And it took advantage of some cooler aspects of Ninja Steel mythology. So the way they explain the powers is a little bit convoluted. I mean, in terms of like, it didn't need to be as convoluted as they made it. It has something to do with the Morphin Master staff and some of the residual connection with the Dino keys and stuff. And they explain the fact that they still look like dinos is, Billy said, I just kept the dino theme. It makes sense, or it felt right, which I kind of liked. I thought that was a fun nod, a fun way of explaining it. I mean, I thought it would just be as simple as they still had a residual connection to their old powers, or, you know, using fragments of it, because I know this is in the comics, but there's precedent in the comics for, like, residual connections doing that. Like, the MMPR Pink comic, they used the Sword of Light's residual imprint of the MMPR powers to empower that team. My favorite was the Solar Rangers team in Beyond the Grid. Their Solar Ranger suits took on form similar to their original powers because of the residual connection. So I'm going to choose to see it as a culmination of all of that, but still, I like that Billy was involved with it. I just love the way it all went down. And I have to say, you know, the suits look a lot better than I thought they were going to. I always thought they were fine. You know, I wasn't one of the over-the-top haters. There's still things I would do differently, some mixed things, but honestly, seeing them in action, I can call myself a fan now. Honestly, the only thing that really bothers me is the sculpted chest pieces look a little bit awkward at some time, giving them like these little weird boobies. But other than that, they look a lot better on screen and really work for me. And I always really liked Amelia's suit. There's something about the way that Kylo helmet is in red with that gold highlight just really works for me. And it's got an almost quasi deeper red that pops on screen. And also, all of their helmets look great. They have like this nice shine to them and everything, which is really cool. Also, I have to talk about the morph though. Like, I love the morph music. And I like the morph sequence. I just wish all they need is, it's Morphin time, link to Morphin Grid. I know they only list one thing, but it bothers me that they have to like list what they're doing. Like, stop. It needs to be cleaner. There's something awkward about that. With that being said, I love the morph sequence they ultimately get where they like snap their fingers and spin in. That's really cool. Although they do this weird thing though where they start flossing for a split second before they morph. Oh, also as a side note, I just noticed, maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but up until like Amelia got the Red Ranger powers, she was wearing this pink jacket that was like almost a hot pink, darker pink. I felt like that was like this subtle way of showing that she goes from pink to red. Again, maybe reading too much into it. Okay, now rolling into episode 4. This episode was called Teamwork, but it was actually an inverse teamwork lesson because Ollie is given control of a monster team, and he's sort of trying to lead it like a ranger, getting them to work together, and it ultimately backfires, and the lesson actually winds up being for Ollie to not think like a ranger and be selfish, which I thought was really cool. Like, because it showed like the Rangers obviously working together well because of teamwork, but there was like no real overt moral lessons in this season, which was great. There was like little lessons and wisdom you can take from it, and that's the way I think it should be, is like, don't force it, and don't make it seem cheesy or outdated. But that was kind of a cool spin, especially if this is like the last season of the main series. Doing a spin on that where it's the villain's lesson, I feel like it never properly came to fruition in terms of Ollie's journey as an evil ranger, which I'll get to later, but I thought that was a cool inverse. He was also smart in this episode, like when he learned that the plant life will attack, he used it to his advantage with the Rangers, but then likewise the Rangers used the fact that they can communicate with the plant life to their advantage because it was like an Avatar-like planet where they learned where Zato was. There was some weird stuff when they found Zato where like this tree absorbed him to heal him, which was strange. Like, I think that was weird, but I think the point of it was to let Ion know that there was something up with Zato and let us know he only has so much time left. I feel like that could have been conveyed a little less weird, but it's whatever. I think this was the episode that we established Zed's main bases on Eltar, and I'll go ahead and say they didn't do as much planet hopping as I was hoping, which was a little disappointing, but I'll talk more about that at the end. Rolling into episode 5 was, what I liked about this episode was the Rangers went undercover as this band to sort of get to this installation where they're digging up the lost Zord, because they do, outside of the main Kureno, we do have Ryusuteo, or whatever the hell it was called, the Dragon Zord. That's the only other one we do, which is fine. Would have been cool to see one more? Sure, but this makes a lot more sense. You know, for 10 episodes, these are all part of the same ecosystem. And basically the villains are digging it up, and they had to go undercover as a band. I really liked this because it felt like a fun, like sci-fi, almost Star Trek-y, like sci-fi show episode where you had like elements of a fun filler, but also it very much reminded me of the aesthetics of like In Space and Lost Galaxy and stuff, and I really liked that. And there was moments throughout the season that it was much more streamlined and serialized, but there were little like moments like this, or fighting the worm monsters, or just some of the personal scenes that made it feel like you have those sort of slice of life moments within it, which made the pacing feel better. And I'm actually glad they made time for stuff like that. And this was a fun premise with them using this. They had 2 songs in this, and one of this was this Lord Zed song, and I don't know, I just really liked that. Also, this is around the time where it felt that Fern was getting more involved, and I should say she worked really well in this. Like, the way she ended up there felt natural because she was looking for Izzy. She just kind of accidentally got taken along for the ride, and she fit in with the cast really well. I loved her energy, her excitement for everything, almost like a fan of Power Rangers, like, oh my god, I get to pilot a Zord, and just her journey in general felt natural. Again, I was annoyed by Izzy constantly being overly worried and, like, stifling her, but she fit right in. I almost wish she was more involved as part of the main cast from season 2. It winds up that Zato, I mean, again, they all shift around piloting it, but Zato's the original main one to pilot this, and it's almost presented like Zenith Rangers Megazord to a degree. But I like that, again, we thought outside the box. I kind of wanted to see Tarek pilot it and resuit up as Void Knight. Even I was doing the lining up color thing, but that more had to do with wanting to see Tarek again, which we did. And it would have been cool to see Ollie pilot it, because it could have been Serpentera, Feely having. I don't think they have footage though, but that's a good example of why the footage is a hindrance. But it was cool the way that all went down, and that it was kind of going a little bit different than I thought it was with Zato piloting it to start and adding to that overall system. And over the course of these episodes, episode 5 and then episode 6, we foreshadow Heckle's appearance as they talk about when they contact Tarek that he has a spy within it. For a split second I thought it was Ollie, but then I remembered that Heckle was going to be in the season, and they just kind of show in the background that the daughter of the new villain is like, oh, I have this boyfriend, like, and it's Heckle, and you see him, and I kind of liked the slow build up to that. I thought that was really nice. It wasn't just like, oh, here he is and he's gone. That is kind of what happened at the end, but I like building up to it. So episode 6 is kind of about getting off the planet, and you kind of have this final conflict where Fern becomes Ranger. Like I said, I'm a little disappointed they didn't planet hop more. Them staying so much on this one planet definitely felt for a budget reason, but I also like that this gave the team kind of an underdog, gotta climb ourselves out of the dirt feel, but definitely I could also feel that maybe there were some budgetary reasons. But this is the episode where Fern becomes a Ranger, where basically all the other Rangers are doing stuff, and she's the one that has to save Solon, and her act of courage saving Solon, and she takes the Morpher that was meant to be Ollie's if he was going to come back, and because of her act of courage, the grid bonds with her, and actually her Ranger form is based off of Solon, which is super cool. I think Solon's supposed to be a raptor or something, and you know, I was critical of the Orange Ranger helmet, but as I said, it's not so much the aesthetics that matter, it's the story, and it really worked for me. Like I said, I really liked Fern's energy, both before and after she became a Ranger. I thought she was a great addition, and you know, I still have mixed feelings on the suit because it's just a repurposed Ankylo helmet, and I feel like they could have tweaked it a little bit more, maybe just changed even the eyes. But once you see what they're going for, you get used to it. Again, I still wish it was a little bit different, especially when she's side by side with Amelia. but I did get used to it, and like you can see like where they tried to make it like Solon's horns, so I appreciate what they went for, and it overall, what worked for me, or what mattered for it, worked for me. There's also a funny joke later, classic Javi joke about calling him and, or her, calling Fern and Izzy a literal power couple, which was fun. And then all throughout these episodes too, there's this really interesting mentor-like dynamic between Zed and Ollie, which I really liked. I think on the evil side of things, it could have paid off more, but it did pay off at the very end, and I just really thought it was interesting how much kind of affection he almost had for Ollie. So rolling into episode 7, I do remember this one was called like The Seasoning or something like that, and I made a joke about it being a cooking episode. And it actually did have an element of that where Ion was going over the plan by using spices and cooking metaphors, which I thought was actually pretty funny. This is the episode where we get Dark Ranger, where Heckle's like, I'm a spy, he transforms, he does have the helmet from Kyoryu Navy, and the reason for that, I guess, is because Toei, that's all they sent them. And like, that's not a huge deal to me. I didn't even notice it in the trailer because it was so fast and blurry. But yeah, it is a little bit weird, but it's such a superficial detail, and it's cool that we finally got it. We don't get a ton of explanation. He does mention that he's from another world, had a bit of redemption, but that's all we get. I wish we could get more, but I understand there's not time for it. I'm hoping that maybe there's like a Q&A or something with somebody that they came up with the backstory for it, or maybe a future story can explore it. But other than the helmet looking different, there's nothing that contradicted the comic, so I could still consider that to be part of this to a degree. You know, the same thing happened in the different universes, so regardless, it was very fast, you know, his whole introduction, but it was cool to see because it was kind of like a nod to something paying off that they teased so much in Dino Fury, I think, or Dino Charge. I think they all even had plans for a toy. I think someone found like a listing for a Talon Ranger. So it felt like a cool thing for the final season to include this thing that just kept almost happening. Plus, we're only one Dino Thunder Ranger away from seeing a full lineup because you had like the Dino Cosmic Fury Rangers, you had Billy, and then you had Heckle. It was the best Dino team up they've done so far. We also get a lot of Tarek action in this as he's the leader of the Resistance. Admittedly, like, it would have been cool to see him suit up or being like, oh, we can restore your suit. Or, you know, I was thinking Ryuso Brown would have been cool to see. Or, you know what, if they had to paint the Void Knight suit they had painted a different color, I think it would have been cool to see him get a new suit. But also, it was cool just to show him being a badass as a civilian. And I was really glad, not only did we see him, but he was in the season quite a bit because he was one of my favorite characters and I was hoping to see him more in this season. And I felt it would have been weird not to see him a lot. They obviously couldn't get Santara's actress back for some reason, as she's only in a photo that was probably photoshopped at the end, maybe? But I'm glad that Tarek was in it a lot. Like, the whole rescuing of their city and the rescuing of Earth did feel a bit rushed, admittedly, but I like that at the end of this episode it wasn't like, we destroyed this one thing, all of Earth is saved. It was just the city, and then over the course of the next couple episodes, they mentioned, like, okay, yeah, slowly Earth is being rescued by all these other Rangers, which again, we don't really see them until the very end, sort of, but I like that it was mentioned at least. Episode 8, Mucus and Slither come back. While not their biggest fan in the original series, I thought they were used well here. They still have bits that don't work for me, but I think overall, like, making it a connection to Dino Fury and having their role in the story being helped get Ollie back, and all this other stuff, mostly worked for me. I just thought it worked and it served its purpose, and it was overall a nice conclusion for those characters that liked what they did. And there was some funny stuff with like her pretending to be a lawyer, which I thought was fun. This is where we started to get into Zato's story more too, with like, you know, basically what happens is he got basically charged up with life energy and magic by the Morphin Masters. They keep calling it magic. I think that's because they simplified it at the beginning by referring to them as wizards. And effectively, he drains his life energy every time he uses it, and eventually he runs out, he'll go back into the grid without them to charge it. And I'm going to talk more about Zato at the end, because there's some mixed feelings brought up from a lot of people about it. But we start digging into that a little bit more and hinting towards what's going to happen to him and set it up for the finale. And their plan with using Mucus and Slither in this episode was effectively blowing up his statue because it was his last connection to the original powers. And it seems like, oh, it didn't work, but you kind of can tell in the next episode it's going to be a sudden turn. And I thought that was well done. I like going into episode 9 now that was well handled of him, like suddenly betraying them and warning them via camera. There was a lot of attention on the media reporting everything. I do wish that there was like one last good battle with Evil Ollie. I felt there was a lot building for him, a lot of potential with him, especially with Zed mentoring him. I think it would have been cool to have one last sort of final battle with Evil Ollie before this worked. It felt a little anticlimactic, I have to admit. Billy gives some good advice then in this episode to Amelia, saying like, okay, you can go, save Ollie, do all this, it's risky, like if you just wait a little bit, there'll be more Ranger teams behind you. It was a nice scene again reminding you other Ranger teams are active. He also does mention that a lot of aliens are being brought in from planets that were attacked during this to New Tech City. Now, I'm like, that's really cool. This was their way of sort of acknowledging SPD and its timeline. And initially I was like, well, that doesn't make sense, like that they would start, because right now I think it's 2022, 2023, SPD takes place in 2025. So you could say like, oh, they're setting up so aliens live in New Tech City and stuff and on Earth before it. But then you remember stuff like Z had that flashback when she was little and aliens were living there. So what I'm going to take it to mean is that New Tech City has always been a sanctuary city, and that's why he specifically mentions it. Regardless, I really do appreciate that they thought about that and wanted to give it, even if it was just that small line. Definitely disappointed we didn't get a little bit more. You know, selfishly, I was wanting at least an Adam and Aisha cameo. I feel like they could have shot just a couple small little scenes of them Skyping in like they did in Once and Always, and I think it was missed potential, especially with the setting of this, but I am really thankful they acknowledged that, you know, because it's something that we've talked about for a long time. So basically, Zayto sacrifices himself when they try to blow up the castle or whatever with this isn't going to be under 30 minutes, I can tell by the clock right now. But Zayto sacrifices himself, and then he goes into the grid, and Ion holds into him, so his spirit, like, goes up with him. It's really weird. Again, I'm going to put a pin in Zayto's storyline for now, but it kind of takes them off the board for the finale. But then when we get to the actual finale stuff, it's really cool, because Zed's plan effectively is to take the Morphin Masters they capture at the end and become an evil Morphin Master and spread his evil everywhere. And there was a fan theory, I think I even might have did a video on it, or at least mentioned it, of like, would Zed take the form of the final Kyuranger villain because there's some similarities to their aesthetics, and that would have been a cool, classic PR way to take advantage of existing assets of the Sentai you're using. But it was an original suit. Thank God. I'm so glad it wasn't tied to Sentai. Not only that, it was an awesome suit. I don't care what anyone says, I love that Zed suit. Not only was it just awesome looking, but it was a completely unexpected twist, because I'm like, oh, they're totally gonna use a Kyuranger suit. So that was really great. There's also a reoccurring bit about Z and N looking like each other when you flip them, which I never thought about before this moment, where like there was a moment when he's like, I want Z ice cubes, these are N. He's like, just turn it. And he tries to write the Z on the mountain. They're like, oh, it's an N. I thought that was funny. Now this is something I feel like people are gonna have mixed feelings on, is the twist ending of the corporation people who's the villains, I can't remember their names at this moment, betray Zed, and they stuff him in a tube, and they're going to basically do an evil Z-Wave. Now, Zed gets a moment in the next episode, in the finale, but people I know are going to complain that Zed was nerfed and whatever. I like this twist, because the whole episode, or the whole season, I was thinking, it would be cool if Zed just betrayed these corporate guys and proved his power by taking over their resources, because it felt weird having these guys so tied to it. But I liked that it was an unexpected twist, and they basically want to use it to create evil everywhere, which is obviously an inverse reference to Countdown to Destruction. They even make a direct line reference to it in this. But also they want to use it so that there's continuous war, so they continuously profit, which is what I said at the beginning is, there's really interesting aspects to these villains in terms of a villain in PR. It's never been done like that before. Very much reminded me of like The Last Jedi, like, oh, there's people that just profit from the First Order, Resistance, Rebels, Empire fight. Like, live free, don't join. And like, it's a really interesting idea and message for a villain, but it's wrapped up in this really campy stuff that I know is not going to work for everyone. And I'll just say there is some weird campy humor with them and other stuff that doesn't always land. Oh, we reached the end, the final episode, and so Zayto is not there, really. It's actually Zordon. They heavily imply it's Zordon, which is really funny because I've seen a couple thumbnails of theory videos of like, is Zayto going to become Zordon? And it wasn't Zayto and Zordon merging, it was just one of those things like when you're in a mind palace and your mind sees what you want, and Ion sees Zordon as Zayto, but he doesn't remember himself. He's in this weird ether that not even the Morphin Masters know about, but he effectively gives Ion the push to go back. It's a little bit weird, to be sure. And they initially come up with this plan to like bring the bomb to the morphing grid, which might sever the connection, which would have been a really interesting way for the whole series to end if they cut off all the Rangers. I almost thought they were going to do that, and like the grid was going to cut off all the Rangers, but then they were going to have like the Venjix eye lights up, Magneto almost moves the chess piece ending where it's like, no, the power is not gone forever. But that's not what winds up happening, because originally they're like, okay, if we just plug in all like the staff like Javi did, but all together. But then Zayto shows up as a Morphin Master, which I feel like I liked this. I think there could be more to it, but I feel that there's definitely going to be some meme making fun of potential amongst the community for this. But effectively, he brings them into the tube, and they come up with this compromise with Zed of like, hey, Zed, if you let go of the power, it won't destroy anything. Like, if you let this wave happen, evil will be everywhere, but you'll be dead. But if you let go of the power, you'll survive. And I like the way this was done, actually. You know, it didn't give Zed a big final badass fight or whatever, but I'm glad that Zed wasn't just gone after the twist. And they actually put him in like that loop that Zayto and Ion were in, where they saw their nightmares, where he's with a version of Rita and has to live out his nightmares and has potential to change. I still feel like how this Zed exactly works is up in the air. I still choose to see it like Rita's, where it's effectively his evil essence that was burnt off, resurrected. But I thought it was a good place to end it. It wasn't the most climactic, badass battle, but I liked it, and I liked that it gave Zed kind of a final moment, and it also brought back the connection with him and Ollie, where he's like, you know, you told me that all that matters is surviving. So that didn't have payoff in terms of Ollie's villain arc, but it wound up having a payoff here, which was really great. Also, I have to say, really like the way Ollie's arc went in the sense that, admittedly, I thought it would have been cool if Billy would have temporarily worn the Cosmic Blue outfit. But I like the way that now this suit kind of physically represents his redemption and coming back. Kind of like in the old days, I really like the White Ranger suit represented Tommy's redemption. I like that him being in the evil Ollie suit, which I haven't even mentioned up to this point because there's so much that happened. He got his own evil Ranger suit, which was super cool. I'm so glad they did that. But I like him finally getting a cosmic suit. Kind of physically represented that, and it made the arc just feel solid, and I really liked it. Then we get epilogue-y stuff with Zato becoming a Morphin Master, and I was surprised by how confused the Morphin Masters were by all this. I assumed it was their plan, but they were confused by why Zato was a Morphin Master, like how this stuff with Zordon worked, which I was confused by. I was confused by their confusion, because I wrote off a lot of what was going on with Zato, of like the Morphin Masters clearly had a bigger plan. They're like, no, we don't know hell's going on here either. So there's a lot of questions I still have. I'm still curious who was hunting the Morphin Masters down, because they said there used to be more of it. Who's hunting it down? I'm still curious what the original threat attacking their planet was that caused them to create the Sporix. I'm hoping that some comics or something are able to introduce this. That's the bad thing about PR, is not a franchise like Star Wars where sometimes things will be introduced that clearly just need to get glossed over in like the show or the movie, that there'll be a cool book or comic later that'll expand on it, but we never get that. I mean, we do get the comics universe, but I feel like we're a long way off from something Cosmic Fury related being explained. Regardless, it was a bit weird. And then we just have this overall nice final scene, nice final concert, this song called The Power Protects You, which I thought was a really nice like song and way of ending the series if this is the end. I thought it was a really nice, meaningful scene. And it is funny that, I don't remember who said it, somebody said may the power protect you, which would have been a great final line. This is the end of the main Power Rangers continuity forever. Great final line, may the power protect you. But then Zato pops in and goes, cool, cool, coolio. That's the last line spoken. Boom. I thought that was actually kind of funny. And it does end off where, effectively, Billy finds out that Ion communicated with Zordon, and it very much so hints that the door is open for that potential story. Okay, let's talk about some positives. I already talked about how I do like the suits a lot more than I thought I would. I love the Zed suit. I like the morph outside of the clunky, like, having to list that you're pulling out the Cosmic Orb. We know. Thank you, Catherine Obvious. I love the score. I have to give attention to it again. One of my favorite scores in years. It's so memorable. I get pumped every time they morph. So many good moments. Like both those like sort of techno-energized moments, but also some really epic sounding music. Very similar to Dino Fury. Very similar to Dino Fury. I thought the pacing was actually overall well handled. It was definitely rushed. I could tell that there was seeds in there of like, hey, if this had been 20 episodes. But I thought they overall did a good job handling it, considering it. There was something about the way they handled that original arc, in particular of them getting off the planet, that kind of had these moments that felt like slice of life moments that made the progression of a lot of things feel natural. It still felt rushed, but it felt natural to me somehow in terms of like, it felt like they'd been away for a while. It felt like Fern had, you know, built up to being a ranger and Amelia had built up to being leader. Again, I'm not saying it didn't feel rushed, but it unexpectedly somehow felt more natural, and I like that they were able to include some more slice of life, filler-like moments to make it feel filled out. It made me definitely like, as someone who's an advocate for shorter seasons, that you don't need, everyone thinks we need 40, 50 episodes. We don't. I think 32 was the sweet spot. But it did make me wish for a longer version of this. I also do appreciate, even though it didn't, you know, have the most even spread, that they attempted to give every ranger some sort of character story. You know, Amelia's rise to leader, Fern becoming a ranger. Izzy kind of took a backseat, to be honest. Most of her stuff was about her concern for Fern, but she got something. Javi's story about having to deal with his arm. Again, it's all very glossed over stuff, but I appreciate they all had something going on in a moment. You know, Ion being worried about Zato, Ollie being evil. You know, it wasn't the most fulfilling arc, but I like that each individual character being their own person with their own stuff going on wasn't lost, and I appreciated that they at least attempted to have that in there. But they did a really good job, for the most part, of wielding the mythology and having all these things connected, like, oh, the Rangers are off here, here's a reference here to that, like, stuff that they knew existed. And I thought it was handled by people that were at least aware of the universe they were living in, which I thought was cool. Now, as far as some negatives go, scale kind of felt small at times. You know, I like that there was stuff where they're like, okay, other Rangers are off fighting, so it made the overall conflict feel big, but it felt weird we were only seeing the small part of it. We did get to see some veteran Ranger Megazords show up at the end, which was really cool when they made a call for it. I thought that was really neat to show. You know, even if they weren't the best CG, it was cool to see, and it made you feel like the other Rangers were fighting. I think, again, if this was a franchise where you had other mediums, where they more regularly told stories, this would make a really cool book or comic or animated series to show what the other Ranger teams were doing during all this. But I appreciated the attempt, but it definitely made it feel weirdly small scale at times with them being trapped for so long. But I think it was budgetary. But admittedly, there is a positive side to that where I loved the underdog sort of wanted, you know, feel that they had of like, oh, this is this rogue wanted team that's like on the edges of the of space of fighting this. I thought that was kind of cool as like a positive aspect of the smaller scale. As mentioned, the humor didn't always land. It was weird that the humor for the villains was mixed with actually a pretty interesting and unique villain idea for PR, but the humor's not always going to land, and it still is a kid show at the end of the day. I already mentioned the missed SPD potential, which I already talked about here. I was able to talk about that. I think that even though Ollie was really great as a villain, I think there was missed potential a little bit. It felt like they were building towards something with him learning like, oh, I need to be more selfish. Just one final conflict, and I would have felt more satisfying in terms of his villain arc before he became good again. I think Zayto could have been handled better. Before I get to the final verdict, this is the last thing I wanted to talk about, is there was a lot of talk and controversy about him being sidelined and demoted. I didn't feel like he felt demoted. I felt like it was very clear to the audience and to him that his role had changed after, not like on below a million now, but like he was doing something different. He was on a different path. So it didn't feel like, well, Amelia's better than you now. It didn't feel like when Tommy took over for Jason, like, well, JDF's more popular. It just felt like he was kind of separate. He was doing his own thing. And, you know, it was kind of like, yes, this is right, you know, when I move on, Amelia's going to take charge. You know, she's taking charge now, but you know what I mean? So I think, in general, big picture, it didn't feel like a demotion at all to me. It felt like even he knew his role was meant to be different. But admittedly, it could have been handled better in the show. I think that maybe they could have shown him, instead of doing this like, oh, I'm getting weaker and weaker thing, they could have done like a, you know, he's doing his own mission somewhere else, but maybe they didn't want more of the cast separated like Ollie. Or during each mission, he was doing a secret goal, and he knew he was secretly building towards becoming a Morphin Master, instead of like coming up with reasons why he was like knocked out and stuff during missions. That felt weird. I think the way they handled getting him off the board and coming up with reasons why he wasn't there for whatever reason could have been handled better to like have it beat those allegations. But for me, again, the delivery was mixed and I was a bit confused. I guess ultimately his role in defeating Zed was what he did in that Mind Palace Z-Tube thing. But it was definitely mixed, and it's like, why did he need to be around a Zenith Ranger? All he kind of did was be there and faint a lot. He did a couple key important things with the magic, but I think the pacing of the story could have been handled better. But big picture, it never felt to me like he was being demoted. It felt like he became something else. You know, that's the way it felt to me, and I wanted to talk about that. I have to say, though, overall, I really enjoyed myself. I'm going to give the overall series a 4 out of 5. It wasn't perfect. There was definitely stuff I would have loved to have seen. You know, it would have been cool to see Aquitar at least mention it because of Billy's connections. It would have been cool to see Miranoi because it would have been so easy. SPD, you know, you could have seen Boom because that would have been so easy. You know, but I never made promises. Like, a lot of fans are going to make promises themselves of like, I promised myself I would see this, so this sucks now. And there was some missed potential and things I would have loved to have seen for the final season. But I think they really tried their best, and I could really tell that they put a lot of effort into some of these references and connections. And it wasn't perfect, but man, I had a blast. And I gotta say, I loved, you know, I know we used the Kyuranger mecha just out of necessity, because we're like, hey, this lines up, it makes it easier. But just in terms of like the suit, like the regular Ranger suit footage, proved to me we do not need Sentai for this. I just loved having all original. I didn't miss it at all. I thought it wasn't like the best stunts ever, but the stunt work and everything was engaging and never felt really lesser than any of the things we're seeing, you know, and especially when you consider that any future projects might have more budget and time put into it. It proved to me that we don't need it, and it was just so great to see. And it was a very imperfect season, but I had a blast, and I think it was a good note to end Dino Fury off on. Great cast of characters. I love their chemistry. It was a really great group to spend more time with, and I felt that their acting and everything felt even more natural this season. I felt like not only were we free of the shackles of Sentai, but free a lot of the shackles of like the Pleasantville, gotta teach a preschool message in this, and I felt like everyone could breathe a little bit more, which was really great. And it was imperfect, but I enjoyed it a lot. It wasn't the perfect, most amazing conclusion of the Power Rangers universe, but I think all the factors considered, they delivered, for me, a satisfying for now conclusion. And I loved the callback and loop back to Countdown to Destruction. I thought that was kind of cool. Got a couple more videos planned for this, you know, maybe an Everything I Like video, a couple theory videos and ranking videos planned. More I want to say, but I want to cut this down a little bit. But what did you guys think of the season? Let me know in the comments as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell. See you get notifications for my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.